Recognizes himself for an opening statement. Closing the digital divide has long been a bipartisan priority for this committee. Under both Republican and Democrat majorities, we've discussed and found ways to ensure that every American has access to high-speed broadband. Today, we have the opportunity to achieve this goal with the $42 billion Broadband Equity Access and Deployment, or BEAD, program. I think members of both parties would agree that BEAD has not gone as we had hoped. After almost 4 years, not a single home has been connected. Some in my party wanted to completely scrap the BEAD program and start over because of how the previous administration ran the program. But that is not my view. And we want to move forward, and we want to move forward as quickly as possible. And my goal is to fix this program so that it can be deployed, so the broadband can be deployed quickly. The name of my bill that I introduced to do this is called the Speed for BEAD Act, and it reflects this priority. I'm pleased that many of my proposed reforms have been adopted by the Trump administration and that they're working quickly to review and approve state proposals. Still, money alone will not close the digital divide. Burdensome, opaque, and expensive permitting reviews that exist at every level of government continue to prevent or delay deployment. I've heard this from broadband providers across the country. In my home state of North Carolina, one provider has waited over a year for the Department of the Interior to review its application to build on federal land, even though the agency is required to provide a response within 270 days. Another North Carolina provider, their project was delayed because it has to do historic preservation review, despite the fact it's on previously disturbed terrain that likely already had a review. And this is in addition to lengthy state and local application reviews that can include excessive costs unrelated to approving the permit. Unless we streamline the permitting process, all the money we've dedicated to deployment will be tied up in burdensome reviews, resulting in more unnecessary delays, forcing millions of Americans to continue to wait for connectivity. Energy and Commerce Committee Republicans are committed to reforming this process. For the past 3 Congresses, we have introduced a package of bills to address this problem. Each of these bills tackles an obstacle that has either prevented, delayed, or complicated deployment with the goal of instilling certainty, predictability, and savings into this process. For example, my RAPID Act would exempt small cell wireless antennas from burdensome and expensive environmental and historic preservation reviews, as well as reform the tribal notification process to expedite wireless broadband deployment. I look forward to the discussion today to find the best path forward together, Republicans and Democrats. Some of these bills passed the House last Congress with bipartisan support. I hope we can pass those bills as well as the others into law this Congress. Enacting this package will make deploying broadband cheaper, more predictable, and less burdensome, ultimately connecting more Americans. That's the bottom line. I want to acknowledge our partners at the Federal Communications Commission for their work on this issue. Under then Chairman Pai, the FCC used its authorities to remove state and local obstacles for deployment. They work to implement shot clocks and cap fees where they can. Their work is continuing under Chairman Brendan Carr, as they will seek comment later this month on additional proposals. We are grateful for this work, and through these bills, hope to codify and build on what they have done. I hope that instead of playing the blame game today, we can focus on making sure every American has access to the broadband service that is essential to life in the 21st century. We have an esteemed panel of witnesses with us today, all of whom have expertise with the challenges of deploying broadband. I look forward to hearing from them, and I look forward to this discussion. And now I recognize the ranking member, the gentlelady from California, for her opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Before we begin today's hearing, I want to start with something that should unite us. Every American deserves a right to speak freely and safely. Freedom of speech is a cornerstone of our democracy, and political violence has no place here. That's why I strongly condemn the assassination of Charlie Kirk. We must all stand against this violence and stand up for free speech. Defending free speech also means standing against government censorship. Yesterday, ABC pulled Jimmy Kimmel off the air after threats from President Trump's FCC chair. That's censorship, plain and simple, a direct attack on the First Amendment. President Trump has twisted the FCC from an independent agency into a political lapdog to silence his critics. And Republicans are letting it happen. If they truly cared about free speech, they'll pass my Broadcast Freedom and Independence Act, which shields the media from political retaliation, no matter their views. And this committee must do its job, hold a full oversight hearing on the FCC to demand accountability for its abuse of power. While this administration tears down our freedoms, it's also blocking real solutions Americans need, like connecting the tens of millions that trapped on the wrong side of the digital divide. In my district, thousands are being left behind as the world goes digital. They're struggling to pay bills, see the doctor, and work or attend class from home. Eliotata Floyd Elementary in Sacramento, where over 95% of students come from low-income households, parents face impossible choices between food and broadband. When they can't afford the internet, their children pay the price in the classroom. They're counting on us to deliver on broadband quickly and responsibly. This hearing could have been our chance for real bipartisan permitting reform, modernizing outdated systems and giving local governments the resources they need. Instead, Republicans are recycling the same broken playbook, offering the same one-sided, cookie-cutter solutions we heard last Congress. Let's be clear. Republicans are checking boxes, not connecting communities. Here's the real problem. Republicans won't address permitting offices are often understaffed and under-resourced. Mandating arbitrary deadlines and rubber stamp approvals doesn't fix that. It bulldozes local expertise and safeguards. Instead, we need federal, state, and local collaboration. Local leaders are on the front lines. Mayors in my district are ready to move heaven and earth to connect their communities. Our job isn't to tie their hands. It's to help them succeed. This doesn't mean the status quo is perfect. We can and should improve permitting predictability and effectiveness, especially at the federal level. That's why I'm co-leading the Digital Applications Act with Congresswoman Kamek. It creates a one-stop online portal to process and track broadband permitting on federal land. That's real streamlining, practical, efficient, respectful of safeguards and local needs. We've succeeded before with bipartisan, dig once policies and consensus-driven FCC reforms. We should build on that, not tear it down. And let's not forget the bigger crisis. Permitting reform means nothing if President Trump gets broadband funding. The bipartisan infrastructure law made a historic $65 billion investment in broadband through BEAD and digital equity programs so more people can benefit from internet access. In my district, community organizations were ready to use this funding to help people like Mohammed, a community college student who needed affordable, reliable internet to take classes and build his career. He joined Computer for Kids, a digital navigators program offering tools to engage digitally in the greater Sacramento region. Broadband affordability and digital equity make stories like his possible. But President Trump is freezing broadband funding, undoing states' work, and slashing affordability protections. His changes will cost consumers more while delivering less. At the end of the day, BEAD and digital equity programs are our best shot at closing the digital divide. Without them, permitting reform is just a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. We can't let this administration sabotage the very programs the communities are counting on. I thank our witnesses for being here today, and I look forward to the discussion. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, gentlelady. The chairman and ranking member of the full committee are currently on the House floor managing debate. And so I'm going to recognize the vice chairman of the subcommittee, the gentleman from Georgia, to deliver the chairman's opening statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Hudson, for bringing us together for this important hearing, and thank you to the witnesses for your participation. Two of our priorities here on the Energy and Commerce Committee are closing the digital divide and maintaining America's wireless leadership. Both of these goals require deploying infrastructure to connect unserved Americans, like many of our constituents. Whether we are putting fiber into the ground or building the wireless networks needed to connect people in more remote areas, we must ensure that every American has the opportunity to participate in the 21st century digital economy. Permitting continues to be one of the biggest obstacles to deploying this important infrastructure. Too often, broadband providers, from fiber companies to tower builders, are forced to delay their projects because of lengthy and cumbersome permitting processes that exist at every level of government. Money and time that should be spent on deployment is instead wasted on navigating Byzantine layers of red tape. We must address these challenges to ensure that every American has access to connectivity. The legislation before us today, almost 30 bills, will streamline broadband permitting processes and address a range of issues. These bills are: implement shot clocks on state and local permitting reviews so providers have certainty on when they can expect decisions on their applications; cap excessive application fees so that money can be spent on construction rather than paperwork and compliance; exempt certain projects from redundant environmental and historic preservation reviews; encourage federal agencies to prioritize broadband applications; and provide transparency into the opaque federal permitting review process. I'm proud of the work the members of this committee have done to advance these proposals. Enacting these bills will help us build the infrastructure needed to close the digital divide and further our technological leadership. And today we take the first step by obtaining expert feedback on the specifics. Thank you again to our witnesses for your participation. I look forward to hearing from you. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. I'll now recognize the gentlelady from New York in place of the ranking member for 5 minutes for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Ranking Member Pallone's statement, which I'm reading on his behalf. I have to start today by addressing the news of the day. After years of complaining about Jimmy Kimmel's jokes, President Trump was finally successful in having the comedian taken off the air. Now, Trump's censorship campaign has been carried out by Chairman Brendan Carr at the Federal Communications Commission. In fact, this latest Kimmel situation was prompted by an explicit threat that the Chairman Carr made on a right-wing podcast yesterday. The broadcasters that aired Kimmel's show can, and I'm quoting, "do this the easy way or the hard way. Deplatform Kimmel or face the consequences at the FCC. This is unprecedented, outrageous, and above all, dangerous." In the past, members of this subcommittee, both Republican and Democrat, have been among the most vocal in calling out violations of the First Amendment. So I demand today, Mr. Chairman, that we convene an FCC oversight hearing immediately so we can have an opportunity to hold Chairman Carr accountable for the way he has weaponized the FCC against free speech and expression. With that, I will turn to the issue at hand. Fast, reliable, affordable broadband internet is absolutely essential to modern life. It is the engine that powers most of our daily lives, and that's why I'm so disturbed that the Trump administration is refusing to get broadband infrastructure funding out the door. It isn't supposed to be optional. This is the money that Congress wrote into law for our constituents to make sure they have the broadband access they need, but the Trump administration is choosing to deliberately delay and undermine the program, which would otherwise be putting shovels in the ground right now. It's a betrayal to our communities and our states who have been counting on the BEAD funding we promised them. While I remain frustrated about the delays in the BEAD funding, I'm pleased that we have a handful of bipartisan bills before us today that would improve old and outdated permitting processes. It is no secret that some federal agencies operate according to archaic protocols that have slowed infrastructure deployment. Democrats are eager to work together with our Republican colleagues on bills to address these and other real shortcomings. Unfortunately, the vast majority of the bills do not address the most pressing barriers to infrastructure deployment. Many of them are just politics dressed up as policy, amounting to little more than backdoor attacks on important environmental protections. Others would needlessly and wrongly undermine local, state, and tribal governments. For instance, the, quote, shot clock, end quote, legislation before us today would impose arbitrary deadlines and a one-size-fits-all mandates on local governments, ignoring basic sunshine laws that ensure constituents have a say in local decisions. I cannot support efforts like these, which would steamroll mayors and town councils in the communities we serve and strip our constituents of their right to be heard. If my Republican colleagues really want to remove barriers to broadband deployment, they should consider legislation to provide federal, state, local, and tribal partners with the resources they need to get the job done. Passing a bill here in Washington that simply tells local and tribal governments to not only do more, but to do it more quickly and with less is simply not a real solution. The truth is, no amount of permitting reform can make up for the damage the Trump administration is actively doing to broadband deployment by delaying the BEAD program, which should have broken ground at the beginning of the year. Instead, Commerce Secretary Lutnick has imposed further delays and forced states to restart their work from scratch. The result is that 9 months later, no shovels are in the ground, and there are fiber optic cables in the warehouse collecting dust. Now, entire communities will remain disconnected and unable to access broadband internet. The Trump administration is also poised to spend billions of dollars to subsidize inferior service options like satellite, which every American can already access today. Low Earth orbit satellite broadband service like Elon Musk's Starlink is the main beneficiary of Secretary Lutnick's meddling with the BEAD program. But federal investments in broadband deployment are meant to build infrastructure to communities that the private sector has not reached. It appears Secretary Lutnick's plan is to saddle communities with the cheapest service available so that he and President Trump can illegally claw back tens of billions of broadband dollars that were promised to our states. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, gentlelady. And I would just like to remind all members of this committee that this is a really important hearing. These witnesses have made extraordinary effort to be here today to testify. I hope we can really focus on this issue at hand of how quickly we can get broadband deployed. And I think we may have some disagreements about how to get there, but I really hope we can stay focused on that. I hear both the ranking member of the subcommittee and the full committee raise concerns about the Jimmy Kimmel issue. I just think maybe we can move beyond that and focus on the issue at hand. I find it interesting they raise that because 2 senior members of this committee in February of 2021 wrote the CEOs of 12 content providers asking them to censor Fox News and Newsmax and other organizations because of what they claim to be misinformation. I also have a letter I remember from March 1st of 2023 where both Hakeem Jeffries and Charles Schumer wrote a threatening letter to Fox News saying that they needed to take action against Tucker Carlson. And lo and behold, a month later, they fired Tucker Carlson. So I just find it a little bit curious that folks are raising this issue in this way now. I hope we can just put this aside and let's focus on the issue at hand and show respect to these great witnesses who are here. As we've now concluded member opening statements, the chair reminds members that pursuant to the committee rules, all members' opening statements will be made part of the record. We'd like to thank our witnesses for being here today to testify before the subcommittee. Our witnesses will have 5 minutes each to provide an opening statement, which will be followed by a round of questions from the members of the committee. The witnesses here before us today are Jonathan Spalter, President and CEO, USTelecom, the Broadband Association; Patrick Halley, President and CEO, the Wireless Infrastructure Association; Staci Pies, Senior Vice President of Government Affairs and Policy, INCOMPAS; and Drew Garner, Director of Policy Engagement, Benton Institute for Broadband and Society. Thank you all for being here today. Mr. Spalter, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman Hudson and Ranking Member Matsui, all members of the subcommittee who are convening us here today. You know, one of the many statistics that are flying around social media, and I confirm it by a human being source, not just by ChatGPT, is that for kids that are entering primary school, 65% of the jobs available to them will be in fields that don't yet exist. But here's the catch. That statistic actually comes from 2016. Those same kids now are just entering or are freshmen in high school, and they're staring at an uncertain future, preparing to make very big choices that were going to shape their lives as well as our nation's future. And we owe it to them and every generation coming up behind them to move with urgency today on the matter before us, to build the networks that will carry them into the careers, industries, and innovations that they and we can barely imagine. And we know that permitting delays are one of the single greatest barriers to their future. Without timely permits, there is no broadband. And this requires policy reforms, but it also requires a shift in our collective mindset toward practicality, towards common sense, outcomes over bureaucracy, more green lights, and less red tape. And we think there are three big principles to help us get there. The first is let's cut duplication. In places where infrastructure already exists, obviously, where rights of way have already been studied, let's not go back to square one. Let's expedite the approvals. Second, clear timelines. On federal lands, that means decisions within 30 days. If after 60 days of no decision, then that's the decision. The permit is deemed granted. We move, we build, we connect. Third is end the gridlock. Where permitting delays are unreasonable or simply unsolvable, there must be rational federal mechanisms to ensure that broadband deployment can keep moving forward. Now, permitting horror stories can be shared around a campfire with a flashlight under your chin, and we've all heard far too many. And I'm happy to share more in my testimony. But what we found is that the problem is rarely rejection. It's delay. Crews are hired, equipment is staged, capital is invested, and then projects vanish into permitting purgatory. And we're not here asking to lower standards. We're here seeking better processes. Our country can no longer afford to keep reciting the same old excuses. If that's all we accomplish today, then we repeat the very same bureaucratic failures we're here to try to eradicate. Too much is on the line. The opportunity for every community to be able to compete, to be sites for data centers and advanced manufacturing jobs, America's leadership of the AI revolution, our nation's ability to compete with our global rivals. We know that China right now is salivating as we speak at the thought of American bureaucracy grinding our progress towards innovation to a halt. One of the greatest threats to our connected future is death by 1,000 paper cuts. This is particularly urgent right now, as we've heard, because BEAD will soon be on the clock. Providers, our members, have just 4 short years from award to build and deliver. Permits are the biggest barriers to hitting these important marks. And Mr. Chairman, if broadband permitting stays stuck in the past, many of your constituents will be too. Our global competitors are not waiting, neither can we. Your nation's broadband providers are ready. Our trenchers, our engineers, our splicers, our linemen, our entire broadband workforce, they're raring to go. Let's get them moving. Let's get them building. Thank you very much. Look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Halley, you are recognized for 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Chairman Hudson, Ranking Member Matsui, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for holding this important and timely hearing. I'm pleased to be here on behalf of the Wireless Infrastructure Association, the principal organization representing the companies that design, build, own, and operate the infrastructure that powers America's mobile and fixed wireless networks. WIA member efforts to deploy and upgrade wireless infrastructure are directly affected by permitting decisions daily, and we welcome the opportunity to share our perspective. Whether it's from the front seat of your car, your own car, or perhaps an autonomous taxi, inside a stadium, on a manufacturing floor, streaming a movie from the comfort of your couch, or while responding to an emergency, access to wireless communications is essential. Wireless connectivity is at the core of every sector of our technology-driven economy. That's why it is so important that the United States is, and that we remain, the global leader in wireless. I'm here today first to share the good news of the American wireless success story. Where we're getting our spectrum and our infrastructure policies right, it is working. Wireless carriers and their infrastructure partners are investing billions annually to close coverage gaps and add network capacity. Mobile broadband speeds are up, way up. Prices are down. Enterprises are increasingly turning to advanced private wireless connectivity, and it's fixed wireless broadband service that's leading the charge to close the digital divide in rural communities, with 13 million homes now connected with 5G fixed wireless home broadband service. These networks will also serve as the foundation for the next technology revolution. Powerful advancements will be driven by artificial intelligence, technology that will be integral to the operation of wireless networks, and new applications and services that will be made possible by those networks. I'm also here with a cautionary message. Our future success is not guaranteed. It depends on the adoption of smart infrastructure policies that unleash the full power of commercial spectrum. In the months and years ahead, we will collectively focus on the importance of winning the global AI race. And as we continue to reap the benefits of 5G, we will also chart a path towards winning the race to 6G. The reality is that neither of those races can be won unless we win both. The champion will be the country that ushers in an era of unmatched productivity and economic growth and leads advances in national security. That's why this hearing is so important. Congress, led by this subcommittee, already passed landmark legislation earlier this year, providing a pipeline of 800 megahertz of full power licensed spectrum for commercial use. That was a big deal. And there's still a lot of work to be done to free up this spectrum. The deployment of 6G is expected to start by the end of this decade, and the U.S. mobile industry will need access to at least 600 megahertz by then, just to keep pace globally. So whether it's a macro tower, a small cell, on a rooftop, inside of a building, the full potential of that spectrum depends on access to wireless infrastructure. We are ready to get to work to build that infrastructure that Congress has called for. At the local level, this will mean having coverage sufficient to provide access to life-saving connectivity and enough capacity to take advantage of the full capabilities of 5G and future 6G networks. On the global stage, it's the difference between winning the AI race and standing on the sidelines. WIA seeks a national wireless infrastructure permitting framework, one that respects the important role of local governments and federal agencies in infrastructure siting. In fact, the local government role is essential for the sustainability of the wireless infrastructure ecosystem. We welcome an effective partnership with local governments. Specifically, we need a permitting framework that is predictable, proportionate, and transparent. And the good news is we're not starting from scratch. Building off of legislation, the FCC, in a highly bipartisan manner over the past decade, has adopted a series of rules consistent with these principles. The legislation being considered by this subcommittee today would codify those important bipartisan actions and strengthen the rules of the road. WIA urges Congress to create the certainty our industry and our government partners need to build the networks of today and tomorrow. I know that we all share that goal of connecting every single community. So let's work together to get the job done. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Pies, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to deliver your opening statement. Be sure your mic's on there.
Chairman Hudson, Ranking Member Matsui, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of INCOMPAS and our members. My name is Staci Pies, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Government Relations and Policy at INCOMPAS. I have the privilege of representing the creators, builders, and adopters of our digital ecosystem. These are the companies that are responsible for the infrastructure powering America's broadband and AI future. Together, we work to advance policies that turn investment into innovation and connect communities to the future. Today, we are all focused on the builders, the companies that are making the critical investments to bring advanced networks and technologies into everyday life. These builders need a permitting system that strengthens communities and secures our nation's economic leadership and national security. We commend this committee for considering legislative solutions today that will address some of the most persistent barriers to investment and deployment. The bills before you represent precisely the kind of leadership we need to ensure America's digital infrastructure keeps pace with innovation. We are at a pivotal moment. The U.S. is investing billions in broadband and AI infrastructure. Our builders are ready. Our capital is waiting, but our permitting system is stuck in the past. That is why INCOMPAS strongly supports permitting reform efforts such as the RAIL Act, led by Congressman John Joyce, as well as FCC Chairman Carr's Build America agenda. These efforts are not just about cutting red tape, they're about unleashing America's economic potential and securing our global competitive edge. Let me be clear, permitting reform is economic policy. Every day of delay costs jobs, stifles innovation, and risks ceding our leadership to nations that are building faster than we are. Consider railroad crossings, one of the biggest barriers to broadband deployment. We have seen fees as high as $45,000 per crossing and delays stretching nearly 2 years. That's not just a hurdle, it is a derailment. The RAIL Act addresses this issue, establishing a fair and streamlined process that balances safety and local authority with the goal of getting networks built. We also commend NTIA's work on BEAD. But permitting reform must go further. Private investments face the same broken system. Across the board, providers face a maze of duplicative reviews and inconsistent standards. Congress should extend streamlined permitting across all investments so every dollar delivers its full value. And we cannot afford to look backwards. AI infrastructure is coming fast. It needs fiber, energy generation and transmission, and advanced data centers. These projects can't wait years for permits to be issued. Congress must streamline the deployment of multi-state fiber routes and energy corridors to support the AI revolution. If we do not act now, we will risk falling behind. And we applaud Chairman Carr's leadership at the FCC. His Build America agenda demonstrates what can be achieved, establishing strict, clear timelines, investigating prohibitions on deployment, and making the process transparent. And we look forward to working with him as he investigates and removes additional barriers to deployment. And we encourage you and Congress to codify the FCC's reforms. Finally, Congress must empower local leaders. With BEAD and private capital flooding in, many communities are struggling to keep up. That's why we commend states like North Carolina, which have taken proactive steps to streamline permitting as part of its BEAD implementation strategy, recognizing that faster approvals are essential to meeting deployment deadlines and maximizing impact. With this consistent approach, states should be encouraged to support digital permitting tools, skilled staff, standardized timelines, and emerging infrastructure needs such as AI corridors and high-capacity connections. We appreciate the committee's attention to the practical challenges of implementation. So let me close with this. America's broadband future and the AI innovation it will power depends on the infrastructure we build today. We can either lead the world in deployment, or we can lead in excuses for why international competitors are moving faster in deploying emerging technologies. Builders are ready. Permits should be too. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Garner, you are recognized for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you. Chairman Hudson, Chairman Guthrie, Ranking Member Matsui, Ranking Member Pallone, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. The United States is about to make the largest investment in broadband in our nation's history. This investment, the $42 billion Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, or BEAD, has the potential to drive high-quality, affordable broadband to every last home and business throughout rural America. But BEAD's historic level of deployment will put historic pressure on permitting authorities. And this is especially true in rural areas, where permitting capacity is lowest and BEAD activity will be highest. Such permitting bottlenecks are a fundamental threat to BEAD's success. Fortunately, Congress gave BEAD the power to fix those bottlenecks. Congress did not restrict BEAD to simply buying spools of wire and satellite dishes. No, it mandated that BEAD fund initiatives to ensure networks are deployed on time and deliver maximum value to their communities. These non-deployment uses, which were written by bipartisan members of Congress, give BEAD the ability to promote things like workforce development, AI, and, to the point of this hearing, permitting improvements. In fact, until recently, states were planning to use non-deployment funding to address many of the topics we will discuss today: surging staff to capacity to local governments, streamlining and modernizing permitting processes, and increasing transparency and standardization. But all of that ended on June 6th, when the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, NTIA, fundamentally restructured BEAD. Before June 6th, BEAD was poised to bring reliable, affordable, high-speed internet service to millions of rural Americans. A handful of states were even ready to begin construction. But then NTIA's leadership hit the reset button. They created new rules to make BEAD prioritize cost-cutting over everything else, and they gave states a mere 3 months to implement these changes, an impossible task, as time would show. Suddenly faced with the expensive prospect of re-engineering applications for a now unfavorable program, many ISPs dropped out. And now we are seeing the consequences. All 56 states and territories have discarded their original BEAD plans. Over 40 have submitted restructures plans, and none have been approved to begin construction. Preliminary results indicate that the mixture of technologies have shifted markedly away from fiber and towards low Earth orbit LEO satellite, with Kuiper and Starlink ranking first and second in terms of location one by a wide margin. Yes, many locations will probably still get fiber, but the distribution is extraordinarily uneven across the country, with some states achieving over 90% and others under 10%. Such low outcomes are devastating for rural communities. They know better than anyone that only fiber can guarantee their connectivity. Those who don't get fiber now may never get another chance. And as AI and other innovations demand more and more bandwidth, these communities will fall further and further behind. BEAD also no longer addresses the primary cause of the digital divide, which is affordability. Thanks to the restructuring, a subscription that would have cost $30 a month may now cost in excess of $80 a month. If people can't afford to use these networks that their tax dollars are building, what was the point of building them? Unfortunately, NTIA is about to restructure BEAD for a second time. The agency will soon roll out price caps that are designed to cut fiber from state plans with all the precision of a lawnmower. NTIA's goal, seemingly, is to increase the amount of non-deployment funds available for them to claw back. That would mean no money for permitting improvements. The impact on states would be disastrous. For example, in North Carolina, the upcoming changes could drop the state from 68% fiber, 38% satellite, to nearly 50-50, and it would cut over $1 billion in non-deployment funds from the state budget. Other states would not fare much better. ISPs, including many small ones, would lose well over half of their funds. NTIA's Chief of Staff recently said that BEAD is a deployment program, not a non-deployment program. That is wrong. It is wrong on the law, and it is wrong on principle. BEAD is a connectivity program, and that is why bipartisan members of Congress designed it to address all aspects of the digital divide. NTIA's misunderstanding of its own program not only threatens billions of dollars in non-deployment funding, it risks connectivity for millions of rural Americans who desperately need it. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank the gentleman. We'll now begin questioning, and I recognize myself for the first 5 minutes. Mr. Spalter, many of your members are helping close the digital divide. What's the risk of their efforts and programs like BEAD if we don't address permitting delays?
It would be catastrophic. We are focused entirely on deployment as efficiently and quickly as possible. But the other side of the coin is we're not going to be able to do that without certainty, clarity, speed, and efficiency in how we're doing permitting reform. We need to move now. The only people that will actually suffer if we don't are your constituents.
Thank you for that. Have your members faced more permitting challenges from at the state and local level, or more at the federal level?
We face challenges on both sides, both federally and at the state and local level. We want to be able to deliver fiber broadband as broadly and widely as possible, and we think that there are solution sets that will allow us to do so. We're looking forward to working both with state and local partners, but also to deal with federal land permitting to ensure that we can achieve our goals of a fully connected nation.
Thank you. Mr. Halley, the Federal Communications Commission used its authorities to streamline state and local permitting process by implementing shot clocks, capping fees. Have these rules helped expedite infrastructure development?
Yes, they've significantly helped expedite infrastructure deployment. The thing I think is really important also to recognize is what the FCC has done over the last decade is implement legislation passed by Congress through the adoption of multiple bipartisan orders at the FCC, and they've done exactly what you've said. They've said, let's treat projects that are modifying an existing structure different than treating a project that is brand new. That's logical, right? It makes sense. It said, let's have fees that are proportionate to the type of project that it is, and that everything about it is a transparent process. And when you do that, you end up with a country that has some of the best wireless networks in the entire world.
Why is it necessary for Congress to codify these rules?
Only Congress can speak with a voice that creates one strong national law. The FCC adopts rules, and those rules have been extremely helpful. However, like a lot of the things that the FCC does, they are sometimes challenged, right, at the local level. And you end up with, unfortunately, a process where, for the vast majority of us, luckily it is working, and we are deploying wireless connectivity faster than we ever have. But there are still instances where in some communities, those rules aren't followed, and that ends up with litigation. And I think we'd be a lot better off if we spent a lot more time deploying broadband connectivity based on a strong national law that you pass than debating what the rules are in federal courts across the country.
I agree with that. Are there areas where Congress should go farther than what the FCC has already enacted?
Well, I think one thing you can do is really focus on federal lands. Mr. Spalter said we have problems at the local level and on federal. That's true for wireless as well. For example, GAO issued a report, it was last year, and it said that roughly half of the applications that are being filed for permits on federal lands are not meeting the deadline that you set of 270 days. Mind you, that's 9 months to review applications for deployment on federal lands. And perhaps even more troubling is the fact that there's a significant amount of applications where they actually didn't know when they had been filed, so they couldn't track them at all. And that's why I think something that Congress can really focus on in a helpful way, and I'm pleased to see several bills do that.
Thank you. Ms. Pies, a number of states have enacted legislation addressing broadband deployment through rail crossings. What impact have those laws had on deployment, and what best practices can we take from those laws? Mike? Yeah.
It's technology.
Yeah.
I appreciate that question because railroad crossings are one of the biggest barriers to deployment, especially in rural areas of the country. When we have providers who have to cross railways, they end up the deployment process ends up lasting an additional year to 2 years beyond what it would take just to deploy the technology. So it's creating a new divide. We've got providers who are deciding they're not going to deploy if they have to cross the railway because the additional cost and the additional time involved creates a barrier that is unsolvable.
Well, have we seen any of the state laws help in this process?
Yes, and actually the Rail Act is modeled on some of those state laws. We have laws in Virginia and Minnesota and Illinois, some of them passed many years ago, that have created progress. And just like Patrick discussed the need for congressional action, having one unified process that enables both the railways and the broadband providers to know exactly what they're working with, what the timeframes are, to ensure that costs are actual and reasonable costs, and to ensure that safety standards are followed is really critical nationwide.
Thank you for that. My time's expired. So I'll now recognize the ranking member of the committee for 5 minutes for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, we know the BEAD program is the single largest federal broadband investment in American history, dedicating over $42 billion to connect every home and business in America. We're all excited about that. But just when states think they can move forward, this administration shifts the goalposts, first by freezing funding, and then by recklessly rewriting the rules, and now by threatening arbitrary price caps that gut broadband quality for our most vulnerable communities. Mr. Garner, you've been working on this a long time. How will this administration's BEAD changes impact our ability to connect every American to reliable, affordable broadband? And how much more changes can we take? Can we complete this thing?
Thank you for the question. So the changes NTIA has already made will make it so that BEAD cannot reach every unserved American in the country. They have instituted a new criteria by which locations that are too expensive just simply are no longer eligible for BEAD. So by definition, it will not serve everyone. But of the people it does serve now, on average, they will get more expensive service that is slower and less reliable, and fewer people are going to get it. The investments they're making are not going to pay off over the long term. They're not going to be as reliable for generating the economic development that we sort of expected to see from the original BEAD program.
Oh, that's very disappointing, since we're all excited about connecting every American. Now, broadband infrastructure means nothing if people can't afford to use it even, or lack the skills to do so. That's why President Trump's illegal axing of digital equity grants, including $70 million for my own state, is so devastating. He's ripping away funding meant to help workers learn digital skills, seniors avoid scams, and families use telehealth and other cost-saving tools. Mr. Garner, how does this affect the communities that need help the most and the local organizations that are counting on the funding to serve them?
So by cutting the Digital Equity Act, in addition to a host of other changes to the BEAD program, the loss of the ACP, this means that we're going to get less return on our investment from the BEAD program. The people are not going to be able to use the networks nearly as effectively as we wanted. Additionally, when we bring internet to many of these communities for the first time, we're bringing both the best the internet has to offer, but also a lot of the worst, the scams and all the dangers that can happen. So without the digital equity money to help people be safe online, we're creating inadvertently additional risks.
Sounds worse and worse here. Now, I'm disappointed that this hearing is being used to push partisan proposals that gut environmental protections and override local authorities rather than focusing on practical solutions to real problems. Where permitting can be improved, Democrats are ready to work on bipartisan solutions. That's why I co-lead the Digital Applications Act with Congresswoman Kamek. This bill fixes a major barrier for broadband deployment, inconsistent permitting timelines, and paperwork access across federal agencies. Mr. Halley, would you explain how a digital standardized permitting portal can reduce administrative burdens and speed deployment?
I think we should be focused on digital tools and not focus our energy on paper applications anymore, and that's why your bill is so important. One of the most important things we can do is just make the process as easy as possible for those who are on the receiving end of a lot of permits. And so we're very supportive of your legislation that would require the adoption and use of online portals and digital tools to expedite the process.
Okay. Now, a smart broadband strategy doesn't mean throwing billions at the cheapest technology, especially if it means abandoning affordability and capacity to adapt to future connectivity needs. Mr. Spalter, what are the long-term trade-offs as states lose flexibility to direct BEAD funding to the best mix of technologies? How does this impact upkeep, performances, and consumer affordability?
Thank you, Congresswoman Matsui, for that question. And we are going to continue to work in close coordination with our colleagues at NTIA to ensure that we can actually have the best results, the most positive results for your constituents and all constituents around the country with the BEAD dollars that are going to be deployed. We're also encouraged, Congresswoman, that they have committed to making sure that those dollars are actually sent to the states by the end of the year. We are ready. Our schools are in the fields, in the warehouses. Our linemen, our technicians, our workforce are raring to go, are ready to go. But that's just part of the solution set. We need then to go to do the hard work of ensuring that it will not be persistent problems in delays because of permitting that are going to challenge us from actually getting over the finish line of getting those dollars.
Certainly. And I just have to say, though, that I've been very disappointed in the fact that the delays that we have expediting broadband itself is really difficult for me to bear because we were really hopeful about this, so I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. I now recognize the Vice Chair of the Subcommittee, the gentleman from Georgia, for 5 minutes to ask your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, thank the witnesses for being here. You know, my entire tenure in Congress has been a top priority of mine to expand broadband access throughout rural America, and in particular, the rural Georgia and the 12th District of Georgia. It is frustrating, though, that no matter how many billions, and this is typical of so many things, how many billions of dollars we appropriate towards this mission, it remains incomplete. Now, I think we need to correct the record a little bit on some conversation. The Biden-Harris administration had 3 years to run BEAD, and only 3 states submitted final proposals at that time. In the 3 months since the Trump administration reformed BEAD, 36 states have submitted final approvals. I'm also concerned that the fees that some state and local governments charge for processing application and using space in public right-of-ways will only increase the cost of deployment and make it hard to provide service to those who need it. Mr. Spalter and Mr. Halley, could you describe typical application fees associated with building broadband infrastructure at the state and local level?
I'd be happy to. We find in many instances that state and local municipalities use access fees for permitting, not necessarily to meet costs, but essentially as a revenue center, as a profit center, as a mechanism to actually accelerate their own revenue needs. We need to make sure that to the extent that we are providing fees for such permits, that they are calibrated to exactly what kind of costs.
Is there a lot of variance in what you see in these fees across the country?
It is a hodgepodge of fees. They can be extremely excessive in certain circumstances. In Oregon, for example, we find that there are localities that are charging literally hundreds of dollars for fees that should be significantly less. It really depends on the locality. The diversity of mechanisms in which we actually have to apply for those permits is extremely variable. We still are talking about using hard copy and triplicates on non-standard page sizes, in addition to often exorbitant fees that are unmoored from the actual costs that should be associated with fees. We need to be able to address these in a more efficient way, and we're so glad that your work, Congressman Allen, and this committee's work is driving us towards that.
Thank you. Mr. Halley?
Yeah, on the wireless side, one of the things that the FCC has taken a look at is making sure that fees for applications for co-location on existing infrastructure or new builds are cost-based. And that is a fairness issue, right? And it is about making sure that There are funds being raised to cover the costs that local governments do have, and they do, to administer their programs. But those fees should be directly related to the cost of actually running the program, not just to generate revenue and treating the process as a revenue generation opportunity. And what the FCC has done is it looked at what is the average cost of these fees and has
Makes
determined
sense.
what's reasonable. And you see some communities where it's 5, 10x what the rest of the local governments are charging, and that's the problem.
Right, I understand. Given these fees, I worry that we will not be maximizing the money we've dedicated for broadband deployment. This money needs to go towards building these new networks, not helping local governments. This is especially true for the $42 billion that has been dedicated to the BEAD program. That's why I introduced the BEAD Fee Act, which will improve transparency in the BEAD program, allowing accountability for application fees. Mr. Spalter, you mentioned in your testimony that China is eager to see American bureaucracy slow us down. How does streamlining broadband permitting help us to stay ahead of global competitors?
It tries to even the playing field. Let's be clear about what's going on today in the world. In China, in 2025, it's expected that there will be $100 billion of CapEx invested. 50% of that is coming through an industrial policy by the Chinese government. That's about $50 billion. That's significantly more than we're spending here in the United States. They are actively moving forward on a national effort, connectivity effort called the Eastern Data and Western Computing Project. It's a multi-billion-dollar effort to make sure that there's connectivity between data centers. Unless and until we have the guile and the focus to be able to move aggressively to streamline and make more logical our own permitting systems so that we can truncate the time from application to approval, we are going to fall behind in the AI race.
Okay.
And we can't let that happen.
Right, well, I'm out of time. The other witnesses, if you, Claire, would like to comment on that for the record, please submit that for me. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Soto, for 5 minutes to ask your questions.
Thank you, Chairman. Colbert, canceled. Kimmel, canceled. Attack on the First Amendment, pushed by President Trump and backed by FCC Chair Carr. It's an extortion to attack broadcasters' licenses and mergers and more just for speech you don't like. Imagine if the shoe was on the other foot. Imagine Biden blocking a recent Fox Sports sale until Sean Hannity and Jesse Waters were taken off the air for statements he found offensive. For these issues and more, Chairman, I ask and renew the call of our ranking member that we have an FCC oversight hearing. It's been quite a while since we've had one. Now turning to the matter at hand. There was a vision, high-speed internet for all Americans, and a tale of two laws. The American Rescue Plan, passed in March of 2021. It was in February 2023, then Governor DeSantis announces $7.6 million in rural broadband gets deployed in Central Florida in areas of my district like Kenansville, Deer Park, Bull Creek, and Yeehaw Junction, which is a place. We all have those. Infrastructure law passed in a bipartisan way November 2021. June 2023, allocations announced. End of 2024, all states' plans are approved. It's been an 8-month delay. Why? Because President Trump stopped the program, and then adding tariffs and mass deportations hasn't hurt either. 5.8 million Americans are still waiting, including many folks in rural areas of Florida. Permitting reform is part of the solution, so this is an important topic, but so are some of these other issues that we're talking through. Mr. Spalter, how has tariffs affected broadband lately? How has that increased the costs? Are we going to just get less bang for the buck with the money we're spending now because of the tariffs?
At the moment, we're evaluating closely to the extent our supply chains are impacted by potential impacts from tariffs, but I will tell you that all of our broadband providers, all of our members have already pre-positioned their infrastructure, their human capacity, and are ready to go to deploy as quickly and aggressively as possible given current circumstances. And we're going to continue to work with our partners, both at the state and local level, but also across the administration to ensure that we can allow them to do their work as aggressively as possible.
Where do you think the balance is with local governments? You know, I know there's constantly a tension as we're going through. I have a bunch of little towns in my area and counties. They want some say in it, but we have to make sure we can deploy this. What do you think that balance is to make sure we could get this broadband out the door?
To the extent that you're referencing the balance of local officials in the discussion of permitting,
Sure.
I think, of course, our state, local, and municipalities have to have a clear and a voice. Local expertise is extraordinarily important. And I think our overall goal has to be collectively never to lower our standards when it comes to permit review. It's simply to see if there are ways that we can create solutions, for example, through the Digital Applications Act, through making sure that we have national baseline standards, deduplication, where previously analyzed, approved, and or existing approvals can lead us to speedier approval so we don't have to actually endure more costs, not only for members, but for broadband providers, but also for constituents.
Thank you. Mr. Halley, where do you think prime areas are that cellular service can help with high-speed internet? I know there's some effort to be part of that solution. Where do you think the prime areas are in America for those efforts?
In terms of the benefits of wireless?
Yeah, in terms of providing high-speed internet.
Well, I think the wireless connectivity is literally this is a central element of pretty much every aspect of our economy right now. I said in my testimony, 13 million homes right now are getting access to broadband at their home, providing speeds of several hundred megabits per second. These are many homes who never had broadband before. And we think that the trajectory, the potential path for that to fixed wireless home broadband to continue is somewhere near 30 million homes. We're seeing broadband speeds on the download side now of, on average, 150, 200 megabits per second. In some urban areas, myself, I've been able to use my cell phone on a mobile device and get over a gigabit per second down. There's unlimited opportunity associated with networks that are delivering that kind of connectivity.
And we get that, and we're going to use various technologies, but it's got to be high speed. We launched Starlink from Central Florida too, so we look at all these different areas, but we need to get this program out the door. Thanks, and yield back.
I thank the representative of Yeehaw, Florida. Yeehaw Junction, Florida. Excellent questions. Now recognize the former chairman of this subcommittee, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Latta, for 5 minutes for your questions.
Well, thanks, Mr. Chairman, and this is a very important hearing, and thanks for having it. Thanks for our witnesses for being here today. But just to verify once again, on November the 15th, 2021, BEAD was signed into law. That's over 3 years and 10 months from now. I've worked on a lot of different legislation when it comes to communications and technology in the subcommittee, and also worked to make sure we had accurate broadband maps. Because we have to have the right maps to know where we have to deploy and where that money needs to be spent. But one of the things I know that when we were working on, initially talking about BEAD was this. I said, don't pick winners and losers. Don't pick winners and losers. The federal government does a terrible job of picking winners and losers. Because I usually say this, when they're going to pick a winner and a loser, we're all going to lose. So I think it's important we remember that what happens when the federal government does things like that. Ms. Spalter, if I could just start some questions with you. You spoke of, the permitting delays, the duplication, the timelines. And one of the things I'd like to ask is, what happens to your workforce? When you can't get people out there to start deploying, what's your workforce doing at that time?
They can actually be either redundant or literally waiting around for green lights to be able to deploy. And it's not just human capacity, but it's also infrastructure capacity. And that actually it creates costs not only for broadband providers, it has potential job impacts. It also creates challenges in terms of economic productivity for the communities that we're meant to serve. Every day, constituents in your community don't get broadband access, creates economic challenges for that household.
Well, let me ask this, because you bring up an interesting point. Is $42.8 billion the same worth as it was in November of 2021 as it is today?
It is.
It sounds like a lot of money, but we know that inflation and everything else, that amount has actually decreased. So costs go up, and so that $42.8 billion is not the same value that we had at that time. So I think, especially listening to your testimony, it makes me think about that. Time is money. Mr. Hawley, if I could ask a couple of questions. You know, when you were talking about the delays out there, you know, on the federal government, on going across federal lands, that 270 days that they're supposed to be getting something done. If the federal government agencies, departments don't come up and get something done, what are the consequences that they face?
Well, I think we have to think about what happens on federal lands, right? We all enjoy our beautiful national parks. People's lives are at risk when they don't have connectivity. Lives get saved when they do have connectivity. I actually just learned yesterday that the GW Parkway and the BW Parkway are on federal lands. I didn't know that, but it sure is important to me that we have good connectivity on the roads that consumers are using as they travel across federal lands. There are workers on federal lands, whether it's energy projects or people who are working at those parks. That connectivity is important. And the other thing is there are a lot of homes that are adjacent to federal lands. And so making sure that we have connectivity and that the federal lands are a part of that solution is really important. I was actually at a meeting earlier this week with a CEO of an executive at a tower company, and he was telling me about the towers they had built on a national park in the middle of the country. And what they're doing now, the park rangers, when people go in to hike to certain parts of the park, they give them a device, and it tracks where they are. It only works because there's cellular connectivity now so that they can see where they are. And instead of having to send a helicopter every single time somebody doesn't come back from that hike, they know exactly where they are. They can go rescue them without having to pay for that helicopter. I said, how long did that take? He goes, it was an 11-year project. Yeah. That's not acceptable.
Yeah,
You can see the types of benefits.
And that's not acceptable because, again, you brought something else up, and I'll just restate real quick because I know this has happened. During COVID, when costs were going up and people were getting less service in Europe, what we were doing here in the United States from our companies was that we were giving more services out there at a lesser amount. So actually, you all did more because you invested in your networks. Everybody did in the industry. So I think that's important for the future success. And I know in my last 28 seconds, sorry about this, Mr. Chairman, just question about INCOMPAS. You know, when you talk about the delays out there, you know, you get fewer people connected. But what does that do to schools, for telehealth, and businesses out there, and people just wanting to stay connected with loved ones? And I only got about 8 seconds left.
We've heard about the dramatic impact of a lack of connectivity for consumers and for businesses from our other witnesses. I really appreciate the fact that you highlighted schools and rural healthcare, hospitals, because the connectivity in many ways is even more critical. And our funds today, whether they are coming from the federal government or they are private sector investments, which a lot of our companies do not take federal funding, they invest their own money, need to be able to get through the permitting process so that we have school children who are connected, so that we have, I'll brag, my son, who's going to be a doctor in a few years, can participate in telehealth programs. Without the connectivity, those people who are beneficiaries of those programs will not have that.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry my time overran, and my time has expired, and I will yield back. Thank you very much.
I thank the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Clark, for 5 minutes to ask your questions.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Chairman Hudson. I thank our Chairman Guthrie in absentia, to our ranking member in absentia, and certainly to our ranking member Matsui of this subcommittee for holding this very important hearing. And thank you to our esteemed panel of witnesses for joining us today. Access to reliable, high-speed internet is essential in increasingly digital society. And I'm proud of the work Democrats on this committee have done to bridge the digital divide in America. However, we continue to face obstacles in the deployment of broadband services that could help millions of Americans in underserved areas. This past June, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration restructured the BEAD program, causing more delays in the construction of reliable communications infrastructure. These delays make taxpayers wait longer and settle for less reliable and more costly internet services. This is not the goal of our $42 billion investment in the BEAD program. We want to increase access to high-speed internet, not prevent it. I look forward to working with my colleagues on this committee to explore pathways to equitably streamline these permitting processes, bridge the digital divide, and unleash the full potential of our nation. My first question is to Mr. Garner. Mr. Garner, as this committee looks at efforts to streamline broadband deployment, what factors should we consider to ensure that low-income and minority communities who have been subjected to both traditional and digital redlining in the past do not continue to be left behind? And other witnesses, you can chime in where you feel necessary. Thank you.
Yeah, so broadband is definitely not just a rural issue. Permitting reform by lowering barriers to entry can increase competition, and it can also give cities a way to sort of say, we need to serve these areas, so you can't leave these areas behind. You have to rectify some of the wrongs of the past. And you need to make sure that these projects meet our needs. Also, I'd say that BEAD, in its non-deployment funding, by law, allows some of that funding to wire apartment buildings or to provide public Wi-Fi or to do broadband adoption, all efforts that will address that urban or digitally redlined community.
Let me then extend this question to you, Mr. Garner. In your testimony, you stated that NTIA's restructuring requirements are leading to a shift away from fiber. I'd like to dig into that topic a bit more. Can you explain to this committee the negative impacts of shifting away from fiber and how they could perpetuate the digital divide? How that could, excuse me.
Yeah, so shifting away from fiber is similar from shifting from paved roads to dirt roads. Dirt roads may be cheaper, but you're gonna do a whole lot less economic development, healthcare. You're not gonna grow a modern economy with dirt roads, and the same is true for fiber. So as we lose fiber, the areas that lose it are going to lose all the economic benefits that it drives, the entrepreneurship, the increased investment, the government efficiency. For example, FEMA now requires you to get online, have an email address, and work through these portals, use your digital skills to be able to access government benefits. That saves the government money. It ensures people can use their programs too. So it is going to be a very big blow for the communities that miss out on this arguably last best chance they'll ever have at getting the infrastructure of the future.
And in terms of just sort of the efficiencies, I think that one of the concerns is that, we know that fiber optics, can withstand far more traffic than any other sort of infrastructure. Would you give a little bit more detail on why fiber is such a game changer, if you will?
Yeah, it's bandwidth capacity. It can handle anything you throw at it. Whatever that comes in the future, whatever you need today, it will be a guaranteed connectivity. But also, once you get it to the household, it is guaranteed to work, and it's gonna work for 50 years. All their services, while they have their roles, they cannot give that guarantee. If you live on a hill, if you live in mountains, if you live near trees, if you're in a somewhat densely populated area, a lot of these other systems, like satellite, just simply will not reliably give you broadband service.
Very well. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. And now recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Griffith, for 5 minutes to ask your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to start by asking for unanimous consent to insert several letters into the record. We've heard some discussion today, Mr. Chairman, about business decisions being made and allegations that political influence was used in somehow, in some way, in those business decisions. And so I would like to submit a letter of March 1st, 2023 from Charles Schumer, then Majority Leader of the United States Senate, and Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries of the United States House of Representatives, disagreeing with Fox News, and a letter dated February 22nd, 2021, signed by member Congresswoman Eshoo and member Congressman Jerry McNerney, where they asked questions of 12 different companies that provide TV networks to local homes. And in one of the questions, they specifically asked, are you planning to continue carrying Fox News, Newsmax, and One America News Network on UVerse, DirecTV, and AT&T TV, both now and beyond any contract renewal date? If so, why? And I would submit those for the record, Mr. Chairman. All right, Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad to see this subcommittee discussing my bill, H.R. 278, the Broadband Leadership Act, which would make telecommunications infrastructure construction more efficient by expediting local permitting decisions. Under my bill, if a local permit is not approved or denied within 90 or 150 days, or an extension waiver is not obtained, the broadband provider would be granted a permit by default. Additionally, my legislation would ensure that permitting fees are tied to actual permit processing and equipment maintenance costs. Mr. Spalter, have your members seen delays in local permitting that could be interpreted as favoring certain providers over others?
Yes, we have. We've also seen significant initiatives to ensure that there's not only favoritism, but there also can be instances where there are revenue-based decisions about how those fees are actually established for allowing permitting, and we have to actually move forward and streamlining them, including through supporting your bill.
And of course, one of the problems I have is some of my areas don't have service. In certain neighborhoods, they don't have it, and in certain parts of rural counties, they don't have it. And could you provide some examples of exceptionally long permit delays that your members have experienced? Because the permit delays means some of my people aren't getting the broadband service.
I think of just several examples. For example, we were recently in Utah at the beginning of the summer. One of our local members there told me that they had waited literally 3 years to get a permit to go onto federal land to repair a single fiber optic line. 3 years. I heard another colleague in Mr. Latta's district that I spoke to last week who had similar concerns, that with respect to his accessing rights-of-way on a railroad line, he was delayed 7 months before he got to the ability to actually get a flagger on the rights-of-way at $1,200 an hour. These are just two small examples that, if you actually extrapolate those, are littering all parts of our country, communities across state, local, federal, and railroad rights-of-way.
Well, and I know it's not all situations, but do you believe that in some localities, clear again, not all, that they're charging fees on broadband permits and fees for easement or pole attachment fees as a revenue stream for the community?
Oh, absolutely. That is something that we see not only with respect to permitting fees, but we also see, for example, franchising fees on top of permitting fees in certain municipalities that are slowing down our ability to not only carry those costs, but are sometimes becoming disincentives for our providers to go into those municipalities and deliver service because of the excessive costs that are entirely unmoored from reality.
Doesn't that not particularly affect low-income areas where it's already a disincentive to go in there because you may not have that many households, and where you do, they may not be able to afford the product?
100%.
Yeah, that's my concern in a district that's economically stressed and mostly rural. I do have some small cities that operate and some small localities that operate some things, but oftentimes they also have areas that are more economically stressed than the rest of the community. I do appreciate it. I have some other questions I'll submit for the record, and Mr. Chairman, with that, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the representative from California, Mr. Ruiz, for 5 minutes.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. In light of the Congressman's remarks earlier, I too would like to submit something for the record. It came out about less than an hour ago from CNBC, the Stock and Market and Business, where the Trump floats pulling licenses if networks are against him after Jimmy Kimmel suspended. There's a difference between members of Congress doing oversight, sending a letter asking them about their decisions, versus the President of the United States actually demanding that people pull the license of people who disagree with them. I'd like to also submit this one that says, FCC Chair Carr says, quote, "We're not done yet," after Jimmy Kimmel's suspension by ABC.
Are these articles?
Yeah, these are articles.
Okay,
Yeah.
sure.
Will you?
Without objection.
Thank you. You know, I believe the Bill of Rights define the core of our country, and I hope my Republican colleagues recognize their importance. They certainly recognize the importance of the Second Amendment, But you can't have the second if you don't have the First Amendment, so I especially would like them to recognize the First Amendment. While you may not agree with the content, canceling Jimmy Kimmel Live out of fear of retaliation from a president who quite literally can't take a joke clearly infringes on our First Amendment right to free speech. And I look forward to our upcoming FCC oversight hearing, where I will have the opportunity to question Commissioner Carr about these actions. Okay? Now, changing subjects, we often hear calls for expanding broadband access and streamlining permitting processes. While these goals sound appealing, the real issues are in regions without broadband, like the ones I represent. Oh, and by the way, incentivizing resources where they are needed the most is the definition of equity. So you all right now are having a hearing on equity in wanting to expand broadband access where they're needed the most. So according to the Coachella Valley Economic Partnership, only 5 census tracts in the valley meet the Federal Communication Commission's broadband standard. In Imperial Valley, nearly 30% of residents lack broadband subscriptions, with families traveling long distances for medical care and children falling behind without reliable internet. Similarly, roughly 6% of households in Hemet, 5% in San Jacinto, 78%, 7 to 8% in Banning and Beaumont lack reliable broadband, limiting access to education, telehealth, and local business opportunities. The problem is, the Trump administration in January froze these broadband access projects entirely. They froze them. Subsequently, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration issued a policy notice in June that forced states and territories to throw out their BEAD plans, these programs, and start all over. That decision has set us back at least 6 months, and still waiting are students without reliable internet, families lacking telehealth access, and small businesses and farm workers cut off from the digital economy. So, Mr. Garner, I strongly support the Affordable Connectivity Program, which Republicans let expire, and now they're targeting the BEAD's affordability requirements. With these constant attacks on measures to lower costs, how do we ensure broadband is not just available, but affordable for families living paycheck to paycheck?
Thank you for the question. I think one thing to do would be to bring back the ACP, which not only ensures that broadband is affordable to households, it helps attract broadband infrastructure to the low-income communities. Because when you have a guaranteed subsidy for these low-income communities that are harder to serve, you have reliable customers. So it helps to solve the infrastructure problem too. Then you could also fix the affordability components of the BEAD program. We are using public funds to build networks in areas that, by definition, will not see competition. So if we do not give affordability protections on these networks, there's no way to ensure people can afford them.
Thank you. Permitting reform should be done, but it must be done right. It should never come at the cost of our communities, our state, local, and tribal partners, or our environment. So these bills before us today bypass tribal processes, forcing resource-strapped tribes to meet strict timelines for approving construction on culturally and historically significant lands. They're basically giving companies blank checks to go in without consent, without permission, onto tribal lands to do their own business. And I think tribes should definitely be at the table at all times. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Guthrie, for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and I'm sorry I was in another meeting and didn't have the opportunity to hear your testimony. I'm excited about what we're working on and hopefully getting our broadband permitting reform and things done. So, Mr. Halley, Congress just reauthorized Spectrum Auction Authority after it lapsed for 2 years. Restoring this authority was essential to maintaining our wireless leadership. Why is permitting reform so important now that we've restored this authority?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman, and I think it's an important one. I think people think that their smartphone just works by magic, but it's not magic, right? It requires a whole bunch of spectrum, but it also requires infrastructure to put that spectrum to use. So Congress just put forward a pipeline, which was a critically important step, authorizing 800 megahertz of spectrum for full power commercial use. That is going to be what really leads us forward with the advancement of next generation wireless networks. But that spectrum is not going to be able to be put to use unless we have the infrastructure that's necessary for that spectrum to work. And it's interesting, if you look at the potential spectrum that's being considered, whether it's 2.7 gigahertz or 4 gigahertz or 7 gigahertz, it's the type of spectrum as we get further up on the chart, that kind of spectrum actually is going to require more infrastructure than some of the earlier low-band spectrum that was used. So it makes the conversation we're having today about wireless infrastructure even more important to fully realize the benefits of what Congress did, led by this committee, with that spectrum pipeline.
Well, thank you. And I understand that the $42 billion authorized in the Inflation Reduction Act, none was spent over the last 3.5 years because of permitting and regulation and processes. And I think people on all sides of the spectrum here in Congress wants to make sure that we can have a better process, so we're working on that. So Ms. Pies, your testimony discusses the importance of broadband deployment to AI, and we focus a lot of that here. As you know, it's a top priority of this committee, and I want to make sure we continue to lead. Do we risk our leadership in AI if we don't reform the broadband permitting process?
Thank you, Mr. Guthrie. Absolutely. As we all know, the infrastructure that we're building, that we're referring to today as broadband, is the heartbeat. It is the entire ecosystem that drives AI development. You have to have connectivity to data centers. You have to have connectivity to the energy companies. And it is the same infrastructure that's being built. In addition, INCOMPAS represents all parts of the AI and digital ecosystem. So we have data center providers, we have submarine cable providers, we have energy generation and transmission companies, and we have the broadband providers. And every single type of provider that is deploying infrastructure, whether it's updating existing infrastructure or deploying new infrastructure, needs certain kinds of permits. And the United States runs the risk that we will fall behind adversaries, fall behind China, fall behind other countries. It is not a matter of intellectual property or innovation. We have that here. What we don't have is the permitting process that supports that kind of building.
Thanks for saying that. And just an example, I'm reading a book now. I'm trying to read everything I can, and there's, I haven't read it yet, but the Abundance Agenda, I think, is another book that's out. I haven't read that. I will. But one that says that it took 3 years and about a third of the price to build a rail line, a high-speed rail, the same length in China from San Francisco to Los Angeles. And we have one that we spent about 3 times the money, many years, and still only a few sections. And so we want that to work. I'm not here saying, well, look at California. I would love to say, boy, we built that in 3. We need to make sure the permitting's right. We don't want to just do what China does. I'm not suggesting that, but that's who we're competing with. I always like to say we're not competing with European regulation. We're competing with Chinese innovation. So we have to do better. So, Mr. Spalter, your testimony includes a number of examples of state and local governments abusing the permitting process, and this highlights a federal preemption standard. Could you give us some examples of that process?
Thank you, Chairman Guthrie. We believe that there is a specific and important role for state and local authorities in the permitting process. However, when there are instances where there are impasses in being able to actually get over the finish line on permitting approvals, delays that are not connected to actually reality or operational need, where there simply are intractable impasses and bottlenecks. There has to be a national standard that is available. We are willing to work with you and the municipalities and states in evolving those standards that will allow for the broadband projects to proceed to completion in this country. We've waited long enough. There are ample examples of how we can actually move forward. We've suggested a number of them in our testimony.
Thanks, my time's kind of expired, but I appreciate your answer, and I think we know, we'll look at your, we'll follow up and make sure we know what we need to do. So thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will yield back.
The chairman has yielded. Now recognize Representative Carter from Louisiana for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's funny that we're sitting here discussing the ways to speed up connectivity projects today. The most significant delay in my home state of Louisiana has been the Trump administration's rewriting of policies for broadband deployment funds. In January of this year, Louisiana became the first state in the nation to secure federal approval for our plan to deploy $1.3 billion in BEAD funding. We were ready. The state was ready, it had shovels in the ground, ready to go in the ground in March. However, this was stopped. Unfortunately, the Trump administration's overhaul of the BEAD program has upended these years of planning, forcing states like Louisiana to scrap their work and to start all over again. The administration's program changes prioritize short-term cost savings in the interest of Elon Musk over durable, future-proof connectivity, leaving millions at risk of being locked into a second-tier technology. Louisiana now faces new procedural hurdles that will further delay broadband expansion, forcing us to wait again on federal approvals and hoping the administration doesn't move the goalposts again once we get close to completion. Mr. Garner, Louisiana's original BEAD plan would have used 95% high-speed fiber to connect underserved areas with broadband. Now the state's new plan uses just 80% fiber, and communities like Assumption Parish in my district and Webster Parish in the Speaker's district will now instead have Elon Musk's Starlink. What does this change mean for these areas in the long term? Will they be just as well served, or would they have been better with high-speed fiber?
Thank you for the question. It means they will fall behind in the long term. I would also note that it will likely be...
Say that again. They'll fall behind in the long term. So we're going to go from a better product to an inferior product.
We are shifting them from a better product that would last for forever, basically, to a product that will not barely meet the needs of today, much less those of the future.
So I want to make sure I'm getting this right. If the state had sufficient funding within the BEAD allocation for fiber, is there any legitimate justification to force the state to use an inferior broadband technology?
There is not. And I would note, too, that while 80% of the locations in Louisiana have fiber now, that number is likely to come down as NTIA institutes another round of fiber cuts.
Going further in the wrong direction.
Going further in the wrong direction.
I'm particularly concerned with the non-deployment funds, as our governor sent a letter to the Trump administration urging it to allow states to use these funds. Louisiana's original plan included the use using $100 million in non-deployment funds to improve access to telehealth in rural areas with limited nearby medical facilities. These funds would have been transformative, especially now as the Republicans' big, ugly bill will cause more rural hospitals and clinics to close. Mr. Garner, isn't it true that the bipartisan infrastructure law explicitly approved the use of non-deployment funds?
Yes.
What other investments would be missing in Louisiana if the Trump administration illegally tries to claw back these funds?
Telehealth, workforce development, AI preparation, cybersecurity, the list goes on and on.
All things that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle on any given day really kind of pledges their support for. AI, security, making sure we have telehealth in our rural areas for people who undoubtedly are going to lose access to health clinics because of the drastic cuts, some 17 million people taking off the rolls. Are we heading in the right direction there?
No, it's setting us in the wrong direction today and setting us to fail in the future.
So what happens now when, if we're using an inferior product? You mentioned earlier when these people, when these companies go into an area where there won't be competition, if they have an inferior product, they're going to kind of be stuck with it, right?
Yes.
No competition, no one comes in, you've got a product that doesn't work, no one's coming in to challenge it, people are at a position where they're being charged more for less product.
And no opportunities on the horizon to fix it.
So we've gone from nothing to worse, arguably.
Arguably.
I yield.
The gentleman yields. Now we'll call on Representative Dunn from Florida for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think Congress must take an all-of-government approach to quickly administering solutions for broadband permitting reform. The 29 permitting reform bills that we're discussing today are crucial for building broadband capabilities. And while we've been moving the needle towards bipartisan reforms over the last decade, the iron is hot now. If we want to continue dominance on a global scale, we must follow through for our communications industry, national security, and American families. Luckily, we've succeeded this year in a few major ways. We delivered a huge win to the American people with the One Big Beautiful Bill, unleashing 800 megahertz of spectrum and securing major tax extension benefits to assist the industry in achieving those goals. However, the third leg of the stool is that we need to follow through on these permitting promises by enacting this reform. Without this reform, none of the infrastructure needed to connect Americans will be made a reality. The GAO reported that from 2015 to 20, federal programs have invested at least $44 billion in activities to support broadband, and more recently, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act appropriated $65 billion for several broadband programs, including the NTIA's BEAD program. However, one of the most prominent permitting actions we've taken was in 2018 when Congress passed the Mobile Now Act, which established a 270-day deadline, a shot clock, if you will, for executive agencies to grant or deny applications for easements, rights-of-way, leases to install, construct, or modify communications facilities on federal property. Further, a 2018 executive order required GSA to issue quarterly reports on the applications to place communication facilities on federal properties. But 270 days seems like an exorbitant amount of time to replace critical infrastructure after, say, a hurricane or natural disaster. We're talking about replacing. My bill, the Connecting Communities Post-Disaster Act, would help resolve these permitting hurdles. Not to mention this timeline is frightening when you have to compete with China. According to the GAO, from 2018 to 22, the two agencies that processed the most applications from telecoms providers were the Bureau of Land Management and the USDA. Only 50% of their applications met the 270-day deadline. That's unacceptable for the United States. And I'm confident that we have solutions in these bills today, Mr. Chairman, to address a lot of these pitfalls. Mr. Halley, several times throughout your testimony, you mentioned how the FCC succeeded in enacting rulemaking for shot clocks for permitting at the state and local level. Can you explain what these shot clocks are and which ones of these rulemakings have been most successful, most effective? And if you want to comment on our legislative package today, I'd love to hear it.
Sure. Well, first I would say thank you very much for the legislation that you proposed. I think we should always want to move as quickly as we can after a disaster to get infrastructure replaced. And interestingly enough, when we're talking about replacing infrastructure that's been destroyed by a disaster, that infrastructure had already gone through a process previously, and that's why it was deployed. So I think it's a perfect example of our principles around predictability and proportionality. When we're talking about adding to or replacing infrastructure that had been previously approved by a local or federal agency, it doesn't make sense that we should have the same amount of delay in timelines for replacing something that was previously approved. That's a really important piece.
Yeah, I agree entirely with that, obviously. I mean, you've already permitted it once. Your association's active in the telecom apprenticeship program. States like Ohio have those programs. Have you had conversations with Florida's broadband office, and can you give us any advice on where, how we're helping our workforce? What's it look like in my state colleges and universities?
We've absolutely had discussions with your state broadband office and some of the higher education institutions in your state. The state's definitely leaning in very hard on ways that we can effectively train the workforce that's necessary to deploy the networks of not just today, but the networks of tomorrow. And I do think it's really important that we not just look at this as a permitting issue, but also as an opportunity to provide the funding for the programs that really will train the workforce we all need to get the job done.
Thank you so much. You know, we welcome you to the 2nd District of Florida, where we have colleges that'll train these people.
Absolutely.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields, and now I'll call on Representative Menendez from New Jersey for his line of questions. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to start off with addressing an issue that is critical to the telecommunications and media landscape of the United States and the oversight duties of this committee. The attack on the freedom of the press from the Trump administration, specifically FCC Chairman Brendan Carr, is unconstitutional and completely unacceptable. We started this with the chair of the subcommittee saying that we didn't want to weigh down this, but our colleagues across the aisle have, and they've introduced into the record letters written by members of the legislature to media outlets asking a series of oversight questions. To compare that to the FCC chairman using his power to force broadcasters into the action that the president wants by threatening to block their multi-billion-dollar media mergers is not even comparable. And that should be obvious to everyone in this room, especially because we have an oversight function over the FCC, the main federal entity that regulates telecom. So if we're going to sit here and try to call balls and strikes, the Republicans on the other side of the aisle have to do it because they know if this was the Biden administration taking this action, if it was a Democratic FCC chair, they would be up in arms like we are because it's completely unacceptable. And I hope that they will speak out against it because to say that what those legislators did is the same as what the president and the FCC chair did is completely unhinged. Turning to the topic of today's hearing, we should all be able to agree that we need to expand access to high-speed, affordable broadband across the country in order for Americans to fully participate in the digital economy. This is an issue that affects both blue and red states and rural and urban communities alike. But while we've heard from both sides of the aisle today about the need to roll out broadband connectivity in a timely manner, the Trump administration and my Republican colleagues have taken numerous actions that hinder connectivity and drive up broadband costs for American families. Mr. Garner, just yes or no, did Republicans' refusal to extend the Affordable Connectivity Program make broadband more expensive and less accessible for American families?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Garner, will the Trump administration's slashing of the federal workforce slow the rollout of broadband across the country?
Yes.
Thank you. So, Mr. Garner, just again, yes or no, will Republican lapse in the Affordable Connectivity Program, combined with the Trump administration's slashing of the federal workforce, reduce access to high-speed, affordable broadband?
Yes.
And we agree that we've talked about artificial intelligence a significant amount today. It's in a lot of your testimony. We also talk about it here on ENC. Ms. Pais, will more energy be needed to meet the increased demand for artificial intelligence?
Yes, absolutely.
And just yes or no, do you believe that to meet that energy demand, we should have an all-the-above strategy so we put as much energy as possible onto our grid?
Yes.
And now we've heard that from witnesses across multiple different hearings, that we need an all-the-above strategy when it comes to energy because that is what AI demands. The data centers, we're already seeing it, could be up to a 12% of energy demand in the next several years, could be AI data centers alone. And now all of our residents are dealing with the cost of energy prices no matter what state we're in. Yet this administration is not taking an all-the-above strategy. They're picking winners and losers, and they're cutting off access to offshore wind because when I say they, the Trump administration doesn't believe in it. We've had people from the Department of Energy who've come in here and not want to acknowledge the benefit of renewable energy, despite the fact that in places like Texas, we've seen that 30% of their energy production comes from wind and solar. And that's why Texas residents are seeing lower costs in their energy prices. So, going back to today's hearing, which is as difficult as it is to do with everything going on, Republicans are claiming to be hyper-focused on expediting access to reliable connectivity while at the same time taking concrete steps that significantly decrease the number of people that have access to broadband by refusing to take an all-the-above energy approach, slashing federal workforce, and cutting funding for affordable broadband. Mr. Garner, is promoting digital literacy initiatives such as cybersecurity trainings for seniors vital for expanding access to broadband connectivity?
Absolutely.
Because we want more people to have it, but we've also seen a huge rise in spam and scams that specifically target veterans and seniors. Is that correct?
Yes, it does. Yes, it is.
And these digital literacy initiatives help those people be prepared for the future that we all are going to be a part of. Is that correct?
That was the point of the bill.
And Mr. Garner, will the Trump administration's decision to cancel over $2 billion from the Digital Equity Act decrease access to the internet?
It will.
So what are we doing here today? Do we need permitting reform to make broadband more accessible? We can work on that in a bipartisan way, but we have to do it in a holistic way, and we have to have our colleagues across the aisle call out the administration when they are setting us back. Democrats will continue to do it. We'll hold the administration accountable, especially if our colleagues will not. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields, and now I will call on Mr. Fulcher from Idaho for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to the panelists, thank you for your feedback today. And Mr. Halley, Mr. Spalter, both of you referenced the 270-day shot clock and some of the examples of how agencies have failed to meet that time window. And my information confirms what you have been saying. In fact, I'm going to give you a couple more examples. In my home state of Idaho, Cambridge Telephone Company tells me that they have projects that still take somewhere between 2 and 4 years to get through permitting, and there was a particular tower process or a tower build request for Brundage Ski Mountain. It's a resort area about 2 hours from Boise, and that was delayed. They found some things in there. I think it was 3 endangered whitebark pine trees, and despite very reasonable mitigation solutions, that project basically just got halted. It did take my office to break the stall on that, but it was also a 3-year delay. And so there's just another example. Another one in Midvale, Idaho, MTE Communications had a project stall due to the need for multiple NEPA studies, NEPA requirements, and that was simply because they were trying to run a conduit and a fiber cable about 100 feet from a roadway on federal land. So once again, those are just some of the examples out there. And I've got I'm going to ask both Mr. Spalter and Mr. Halley this, but I've got a bill, H.R. 2298, the Reducing Barriers for Broadband on Federal Lands Act. And this will eliminate the need for multiple NEPA or NHPA reviews on previously disturbed federal land, which is a huge deal in my state in the West. About 2/3 of landmass in my state are federal. And this would eliminate the need for multiple NEPA or NHPA reviews on previously disturbed land. And it would exercise a right-of-way provision to provide broadband infrastructure on these federal lands. And so I would just ask you, from your vantage point, wireless, broadband, would legislation like this help in expediting the permitting process in your view? And I'll start with Mr. Spalter.
Well, let me begin. Absolutely. Mr. Pfluger, I will say that is the kind of innovation that we need to move forward aggressively in our plans to deliver broadband. We know conclusively that the great majority of permitting delays are on areas where there already have been previously analyzed and approved rights of way. And that includes on federal lands. We believe that a very straightforward shot clock formula and a deemed granted approach, 30 days and 60 days, is a path forward. We support your effort in your bill, and we want to see it cross the finish line.
Mr. Thank you for the question. I agree. We also support your legislation. We think it's important that there's a process where, again, we're not starting from scratch, right? Projects have already been approved previously. We shouldn't treat another project after that as if we're starting from scratch, which is what your bill recognizes. The thing I'll tell you is I get a lot of calls from tower company CEOs, and when we're talking about access to federal lands, the most challenges they have are out in the West, whether it's Idaho, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico. Those are some of the hardest areas to build, and unfortunately, it's some of the areas where we have the least coverage and where it takes the longest to get something permitted on federal land. So I appreciate you looking into the issue.
That's where the bulk of those federal lands are, and we live that in my state every day, so thank you for that. Ms. Pies, in your testimony, you noted the need for a unified approach. I notified that terminology for permitting broadband on federal lands to try to cut through the continued lack of coordination. Also, former NTIA Administrator Davidson spoke of he actually framed it as a federal lands management desk was a term that he had used. And I would just ask you to speak for a moment. Would simplifying the NTIA decision-making process by helping local broadband providers get more predictability, would that simplification process help? Could you speak to that for a moment?
Yes, absolutely, and that's not just about federal lands. When we have a streamlined process, more transparency, less duplication, and something that we haven't talked a lot about yet today, but the use of technology, and there are several bills that address this, to facilitate the permitting process, it's going to ensure that we can build faster, that we aren't wasting precious capital, whether it's BEAD funding or private capital, and that consumers and businesses get access to the technology. And I think that if we look at all of those types of actions, you're not going to find a trade-off with protecting the environment or with ensuring that consumers have access to the broadband that they deserved. It's going to achieve all those goals simultaneously.
Is there a concern about, sticking with you, Ms. Pies, is there a concern about losing BEAD money if these permitting requests take too long?
I'm apologizing.
Is there a concern about losing the BEAD money, the access to the funds if the permits take too long?
There's a concern that the money will not be used efficiently. BEAD has very strict deadlines for deployment, and if you can't get a permit in order to deploy during that time period, I actually don't know what happens.
Yeah.
You could have to return
It may not be there. Yeah,
Correct.
so, okay, good, thank you. So broadband providers that I communicate with also see disconnects between local and the agency management location. So, for example, district rangers may have a certain position that they want to take, but yet they've got to run it through an agency head someplace. And I would just ask, how can we improve communications between, say, the local and the management, the ranger and the agency head somewhere? Can you speak to that at all?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that is a streamlined process. That's the hallmark of a streamlined process. If we have a process that everybody can look to, whether it's the head of the agency or the local jurisdiction, and they understand what the process is, and when you have technical digital portals that can be utilized, and today we even have AI programs that can facilitate that, then it's going to reduce misunderstandings, it's going to increase efficiency, and it's going to ensure that we are using our well-earned capital to be able to deploy.
Thank you for that. Mr. Chairman, I apologize, I'm over time, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Virginia, Ms. McClellan, for 5 minutes for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As we all agree, the BEAD program was the largest investment, federal investment in our nation's broadband infrastructure in American history. And throughout the year, including in today's hearing, the majority has bemoaned the timeline for implementation of the BEAD program to now, falsely blaming permitting as one of the reasons for delays so far. But I think you would all agree, hopefully, that you can't seek permits until you determine where you're going to build the infrastructure and who's going to build it. And the way to ensure that you're not going to use federal money in a way that is wasteful is to first identify who the unserved populations are, what's already in the pipeline, and create a map. You all agree with that, right?
Well, if I understood you correctly, Congresswoman, I would say that there are providers that have already undertaken efforts to get permits, even if they're applying for BEAD.
That's not my question. Yes or no, you would agree that before you ever get a permit to build a broadband infrastructure, you need to decide where you're going to build?
Yes.
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 Okay, thank you. Now, I want to ask a couple more table-setting questions. Do you all agree, yes or no, that federally funded broadband networks should be scalable and reliable and able to meet both current and future broadband needs of consumers and businesses?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Do you all agree there is no one-size-fits-all technology capable of meeting the ever-increasing upload and download needs of consumers in all geographies at the same level at the same cost?
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely, and that's who INCOMPAS represents.
Yes.
Thank Do you agree that the segments of the country that are not currently connected by their very nature are more expensive to connect or more difficult to connect because of geography or other factors? And if they could be connected using a least cost model, they'd already be connected now without federal funding.
Yeah, yes.
Did you ask if they would already be connected today?
Without federal funding, yes.
In some instances, yes.
Okay, thank you. And,
Yes.
all right, thank you for that table setting. With the June restructuring notice, NTIA made clear that it would prioritize lowest cost bids over long-term connectivity in an attempt to root out so-called waste, fraud, and abuse. Mr. Garner, I particularly appreciate your testimony underscoring that permitting is simply a process, but scalable and reliable connectivity is the actual ultimate goal. We have seen how badly a cheap approach can go. Virginia stands to lose about $82 million in federal funding due to grant award winners who defaulted in the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund and walked away from their commitments because they didn't have the capacity to fill those needs. Mr. Garner, can you share some of the other lessons the Trump administration should have learned the last time it chose to prioritize lowest cost bids rather than long-term service quality?
Yeah, designing a broadband infrastructure grant program around a race to the bottom bidding process is not a way to get high-quality broadband networks to our most vulnerable communities. That's what we learned in RDOF, and that is what they are turning BEAD more towards.
And what communities will pay the price and be hit the hardest if these projects are delayed any further or not built at all?
They will not get the same sort of broadband that we enjoy, the broadband that is needed to thrive today and in the future.
And would you all agree that if broadband is physically available but not affordable, it is not available for our consumers?
Absolutely. If you can't afford it, you don't have it.
Anybody disagree? Okay. With the Affordable Connectivity Project gone and the Universal Service Fund on an unsustainable trajectory, and now the Trump administration gutting the low-cost service option under BEAD, Mr. Garner, without a clear strategy to keep service affordable, how do we ensure that no household or small business is left behind, even when the broadband infrastructure physically reaches their community?
We have severely limited tools now because we have lost the ACP and the affordability requirements in BEAD. So we need to build new ones.
May I address that?
Yes.
One thing I think we should also acknowledge is the best thing we can do is make this the most competitive communications marketplace possible. And one of the benefits of permitting and the importance of this hearing is that if we do get permitting right, you will get more wireless infrastructure deployed. You will have more wireless connectivity. The technology that's driving competition in the home marketplace today and mobile marketplace is wireless connectivity. So we should talk about, subsidy programs, and we should look at USF reform as the bipartisan working group is doing. But we should also focus on policies that make sure the $30 billion annually that the wireless industry invests is put to use as quickly and efficiently as possible. And that's why permitting reform actually does matter for the affordability question, because it creates more competition, and more competition brings prices down. So I think we need to look at it very holistically.
And my time has expired, but I do just want to say we need to look at it holistically. And so while permitting reform is part of the problem, I think we've touched on reliability, connectivity, and affordability are also equally important if we're going to leave no community behind. And with that, unfortunately, I have to yield back my time.
Thank the gentlelady, and I'll recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Pfluger, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Important topic, one that I hope will be bipartisan, that we can stay focused on. This Congress, I'm leading the Federal Broadband Deployment Tracking Act with Congressman Soto to improve transparency and efficiency in the broadband deployment process. And our legislation, which unanimously passed the House last year, would require the NTIA to submit a comprehensive plan to Congress detailing how they will track permit applications to deploy on federal lands, which are essential for accessing easements and rights of way to build and maintain telecommunications. So a couple of questions here. I'll start with Mr. Spalter. Can you help underscore the need for this legislation and specifically provide maybe some examples of where one of your member companies had crews ready, equipment purchased, and federal funds allocated, but the project was delayed simply because a permit sat on somebody's desk?
in north central Ohio is one example where we've had crews ready, spools deployed, forward deployed, ready to go, but we've been waiting and waiting and waiting for permits, particularly from a railroad line. California, we've seen multiple situations. One recently, 656 locations failed to be able to be served because of delays where our crews and our infrastructure and our capital was on the line waiting for approvals that never came, and so the provider decided they had to go walk. This is outrageous. It needs to be actually fixed, and your bill, particularly in driving forward efficiencies on 499 applications, is one of the many ways forward. It also requires a whole of government approach. We're really grateful that NTIA has undertaken its broadband task force to regularize how we can work across agencies, but it's initiatives and innovations like your legislation that are going to get us there.
Thank you very much. Ms. Pies, applying for a permit to deploy broadband on federal land can be lengthy and frustrating. As we just heard, how can we improve the process of getting a permit to deploy on federal lands?
Thank you for the question. I absolutely do believe that your bill would be an improvement. As I mentioned recently, the utilization of technology, whether it's online tools, a digital portal, the use of AI-driven software, can make that process much more efficient and much more effective. And some of the proposals that you have in your legislation would absolutely solve that piece of the puzzle.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Halley, do you have anything to add on the wireless side?
Yeah, I want to associate myself with both of the comments that they just made in the wireless context as well. And I really do appreciate the legislation that you've put forward because we do need to have increased coordination across agencies and, frankly, increased coordination between agencies and industry. So whether it's legislation like yours, which would require that coordination, or the development of portals to improve the technology that the agencies use, it's all very important. I was talking to one of our members earlier this week, and they were telling me about a project on Bureau of Reclamation land in California, where the state historic preservation officer about 2.5 years ago approved their plan to move forward. 2.5 years later, they're still waiting for approval from the Bureau of Reclamation. That's not acceptable.
No, it's no wonder the frustration is so high when you have to compete against the government, not at the speed of commerce. The Trump administration and NTIA's recent benefits and bargain round has streamlined the BEAD program and has removed unnecessary regulations which have lowered the cost of BEAD by tens of billions of dollars. Ms. Pies, could enacting the bills before us today further create savings for BEAD?
Yes, I think to the extent that the permitting process is streamlined, that we remove inefficiencies, that we create greater transparency and ensure that agencies are working from the same database of information, the broadband provider can cut costs and save money. One thing that I think is a little bit difficult to assess is when a broadband provider is seeking to be a subgrantee, they have to submit their costs in advance. So to the extent that they understand where those efficiencies can be gained, it can improve the process overall.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, it just occurred to me, we've had a little bit of a talk of freedom of speech, and I just had a opportunity to meet with some veterans who, on both sides of the aisle, are calling for unity after this the tragedy. And so instead of being in here talking about just continuing to add to the nonsense, they're actually doing something about it. It'd be nice if everyone would do that. And there is a difference between freedom of speech and a company's right to terminate employment with somebody for insensitive remarks, which I think is really important. So I appreciate your leadership on everything, and especially having this hearing. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and I apologize to our witnesses. There are 2 roll call votes on the House floor. Time has expired, so we're going to need to rush down. So the committee will stand in recess until 10 minutes after the last roll call vote is called.
The committee will reconvene, and I will call on Representative Carter from the great state of Georgia for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank y'all for enduring this and hanging around. We appreciate you being here very much. Look, one of my top priorities is to close the digital divide. I represent the coast of Georgia, and a lot of my district is South Georgia. And we have a saying in Georgia, there are two Georgias. There's Atlanta and everywhere else. Well, I represent everywhere else, and we need to close that digital divide, and we need to have affordable and reliable connectivity. Another priority of mine is helping the U.S. maintain the leadership on broadband and on wireless innovation, and that's very important as well. You know, the past 4 years under the Biden administration, there's been a disaster for broadband development, our deployment and expansion throughout America, and we're trying to fix that. This Congress, I reintroduced a Proportional Reviews for Broadband Deployment Act, which expedites the process for certain modifications to wireless towers or base stations. No need for us to go through the entire process every time if you're just doing some minor adjustments or minor changes. Specifically, it exempts the addition, removal, or replacement of transmission equipment on those towers or stations from environmental and historic preservation reviews. Mr. Halley, let me ask you, should these simple modifications require a lengthy review process?
Mr. Carter, they should not, and I want to thank you for your leadership, not only this Congress, but last Congress, on recognizing the importance of having rules and regulations that are predictable, proportionate, and transparent. And what your bill recognizes is that when infrastructure has already been sited and you're making a modification to it or an upgrade, we shouldn't have to start from scratch. That just doesn't make any sense.
Well, I appreciate that. You know, I have a lot of business leaders come into my office, and regardless of what sector of our economy they're talking about, whether it be healthcare, technology, or energy, it's always the same thing. Permitting, regulations, crushing us. And they want that certainty that you're talking about. That's what they want. Let me ask you as a follow-up, Ms. Halley, how long is the average timeline until completion for one of these permitting reviews, and how would this legislation improve the quality and timeliness of broadband deployment in America?
So it really depends, honestly, on which jurisdiction or which federal agency you're working with. What I would say is the good news is over the last decade, local communities and local governments understand the importance of having that connectivity. So overall, we have a pretty productive partnership with local governments. But there are times, for example, I was talking to one of our members yesterday about delays in a county in California where on average things are taking 12 to 18 months for a single site review. And that's just way too long for infrastructure that community needs.
And that's why we're trying to put stop clocks on some of these things and trying to expedite the process. We want to make sure it's done right. We want to make sure that, you know, we want the autonomy of the local governments, but come on, this is important and it's needed immediately. We need to get this done. Are there any types of barriers that are unique to wireless facilities compared to wireless broadband when it comes, or wireline broadband when it comes to permitting? Are there any big differences?
Well, it's a different type of infrastructure when you're talking about a tower or a small cell compared to deploying fiber. It's a different type of project. I think there are a lot of commonalities, though. And one of the things that I think is really great about the bills that are being considered by this committee today is it recognizes the difference for different types of projects. So, for example, when we're modifying an existing structure, for example, the shot clock there is 60 days. When we're talking about a shot clock on a brand new build where we haven't previously deployed, it's a longer period. That makes sense, right? It's a proportional perspective where the amount of time where local governments get is commensurate to the type of project that's being deployed, and that makes total sense.
So NEPA and also the National Historic Preservation Act, they've seemed to become quite problematic and when you're trying to navigate the permit approval process. How can we streamline NEPA and the National Historic Preservation Act?
I think it goes back to a recognition, again, of the principles that we've been advocating for about proportionality, predictability, transparency. We do have requirements under NEPA and NIPA for environmental and historic review, and we understand what that process looks like. But again, I think we need to make sure that we don't have the same processes that can sometimes make a project go from what should be months to years when we're talking about rules that apply to a new build, again, versus something that's already been approved. If we've already disturbed the ground, if we've already done the historical review in the first place for a project, we certainly shouldn't have to do it again when we're just modifying an existing structure. And a lot of these bills recognize that. I think it's important.
And I appreciate that. And being from Savannah, Georgia, let me tell you, I know all about historical reviews. Thank y'all, and thank you very much, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields, and now I will call on Dr. Joyce from Pennsylvania for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member Matsui, for allowing me to join in this important hearing. Even in a time of technological innovation and advancement, people across this great land remain, unfortunately, unconnected. Broadband deployment is hindered by burdensome regulations and processes that leave people without that necessary access. In the district that I represent in Pennsylvania, rural areas lack broadband coverage, and it is critical that we in Congress work to expedite broadband permitting to bridge that digital divide that rural communities face each and every day. Last week, I introduced H.R. 5273, the Broadband Competition and Efficient Deployment Act. This legislation would remove the requirement to prepare an environmental or historic preservation review in order to add or upgrade wireline facilities. These unnecessary review requirements are just one of the examples of barriers that can delay or even prevent broadband deployment. Mr. Spalter, in your testimony, you referenced several instances of environmental and historical reviews delaying broadband deployment projects, sometimes unfortunately by years. Would you please speak to the impact that removing this requirement would have on the deployment efforts, particularly in rural areas like the one that I serve, which are so underachieving when it comes to connectivity?
Thank you, Congressman Joyce, not only for your leadership in this bill, but also for your leaning in with innovation and force on making sure that we can address railroad rights of ways in reasonable, thoughtful ways. Look, we absolutely believe in a couple of principles that are embedded in your bill. One is that we have to be able to have improved processes, including deduplication. Second is we have to have what we've talked about earlier, which is certainty. We have to have clear timelines that are acceptable to consumers, to your constituents, to be able to deliver that broadband without undue, intractable delay. And third, we have to have national baseline standards that when there are rare instances of impasses between state and local authorities and those seeking permits, there can be essentially a last-ditch recourse that we can refer to at a national level. So we appreciate your initiative, and we really do support your work.
Thank you very much. You brought up, Mr. Spalter, the barrier that providers face in getting broadband to the other side of railroad tracks due to the long process that delays service to rural and suburban communities. I am the grandson of railroad workers, and in this Congress, I plan to introduce the Broadband and Telecommunications Rail Act, legislation that would streamline the process of broadband infrastructure in an intersection between the public right-of-way and a rail corridor. The rail connected people in generations in the past. Connections need to continue, and we need to be able to work together. Ms. Pies, can you explain the problems that providers face in deploying broadband when the public right-of-way intersects with that of a rail corridor? Is the current notification and application process efficient for broadband providers?
The current process is not efficient, for broadband providers to be able to cross railways where the public right-of-way intersects with the railway. The provider should be able to provide notification to the railway and have the authority to be able to access the right-of-way from the local jurisdiction using standard engineering techniques as well as safety standards, should be able to cross the railway with that notification process.
So connection at another level is what you're telling me. Just as the rail provided the connection from community to community, broadband has those capabilities of doing it today. So what are the challenges because of the fees that the railroads provide that intersect, that stop this connectivity from occurring?
the fees are a significant problem, and I appreciate you highlighting that. It's often the case that the railway will notify our broadband providers that a specific fee is due, and there's no connection to safety or the actual cost to the railway for that fee. That creates additional costs for the broadband provider, which in many ways creates a deterrent. And in some instances, you're going to have broadband providers plan their network so that they don't have to cross the railway.
We don't need any additional deterrents in rural areas.
Exactly.
We have to be able to address this. And as we work to address broadband permitting and deployment, it is essential that we make every effort to streamline the process, remove burdensome regulations, and ensure that broadband is deployed quickly. The Broadband Competition and Efficient Deployment Act will remove unnecessary review requirements so that we can take a step in the right direction. I look forward to introducing and working with railroads, with providers, and other stakeholders on the Rail Act to ensure that this process is fair, that it is efficient, and that it is effective for all that are involved. We must work together towards solutions that expedite permitting to bring broadband infrastructure to every single American. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you.
The gentleman yields. Now I recognize Representative Landsman from Ohio for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Chairman, Ranking Member, and Mr. Joyce, before he gets out of here, thank you for your leadership on this bill. This is a really important bill, and I'm glad that you all are here testifying on the need for permitting reform. Just so folks that are watching and are trying to figure out what this is all about, the railroad piece is, I think, one of the more simple, easier pieces to do. There are some questions that we still have around labor and existing CBAs, but if a broadband company is trying to get broadband out to communities, and they happen to, come across a railroad, where the right-of-way, the public right-of-way crosses the private railroad property, we should be able to move forward with the broadband. And our broadband providers should not be facing the kind of obstacles they face now. This is one of, not the core reasons, but one of the reasons why we're struggling to get broadband to the places we need to get it. I'm a big believer that we, as a United States Congress and as a country, have to adopt a broadband everywhere policy, where we appreciate just how critical access to the internet and broadband is. I would love anyone, Ms. Pais, maybe you could start us off. Could you, and this is along the same lines as Dr. Joyce, but if you can just talk a little bit about what obstacles, describing the obstacles that a broadband company faces now when they reach that point at that intersection, and what this bill would do to remove those obstacles.
Yes, thank you for that question. We appreciate your support for the principles in the legislation as well. INCOMPAS providers very often have to cross railroads, more often in rural areas of the country. And as we discussed already, not being able to cross the railroad in a reasonable period of time or at a cost that reflects the actual cost creates another digital divide and defeats your goal of bringing broadband everywhere. Excuse me. These problems exist in railways around the country, not just in a single location. And the costs are often not linked to what price being charged is often not linked to actual costs. I think one thing that's really important for everybody to remember is that being able to cross the railroad and pay actual costs is not exclusive of focus on safety and focus on the workforce.
Sure.
We can have all those things at once, and having guidelines and having the FCC in the position of being able to establish those cost guidelines makes the process easier and helps us achieve the goal of broadband everywhere.
Thank you.
Well, first, I'd like to thank you, Mr. Landsman, for your bipartisan agreement that this is something that we can join nationally to get more broadband to where it's needed. By streamlining permitting with respect to our railroad rights-of-ways, we will be able to accomplish that. And your bill actually provides a pathway for us to do so. Oftentimes, it's not just that we're getting prices for fees that are unmoored to reality or linked to safety, but we're also getting some situations where there's indifference, and indifference that causes delays, sometimes in months.
They don't care. It's not.
They don't care.
It's not top of mind for them.
Or it's a profit center.
Yeah.
So thank you for your initiative, and we are going to do whatever we can to support your work.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. I just, you know, I appreciate the work that Mr. Joyce has put into this, and he really is a leader on permitting reform. Again, our only question is existing CBAs and making sure those are protected, but you know, hopefully this will get done. Thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman yields now. I call on Representative Fedorchak of North Dakota.
Stumbles
for
everybody.
your 5 minutes of questioning.
Fedorchak is right. You got it, Mr.
Did I get that right?
Yep,
Okay.
Fedorchak.
Fedorchak.
Yep, thank you. Thank you all for your attention and your time today. Appreciate your leadership on these issues, and you're sticking with us through kind of a herky-jerky hearing schedule today. I'm pleased to be here before you to talk about the Cable Expansion Act and other legislation relating to permitting reform in this important space. September 30th is a deadline that a lot of us here are focused on in terms of budget discussions. It's also another interesting deadline. It is the day the old AOL dial-up internet sound will retire. And I mention that because if you remember, and I see some nodding heads of remembrance, even some of the young folks here, if you don't remember, but what we think about when we think of that dial tone is how slow the internet was. And so I think it's important to use that as a trigger that, you know, we have made leaps and bounds in the technology since those days of that old AOL dial tone for internet connection. AI, we've got 5G, we've got so many advances, but our permitting process is still stuck in the old, like, AOL dial tone kind of mentality. We're so stuck in that, and we have to bring our permitting processes up to the modern age and to meet the demands of the time that we're in right now, where we need to get this infrastructure out quickly. So I'm excited about a lot of the bills that the committee has been talking about today, and pleased that you all were willing to spend time talking about them with us. A few questions. So Congress has considered legislative frameworks to set clear timelines for federal agencies to act on broadband permitting applications for some time now. I'm committed to working toward lasting legislative solutions, while at the same time I believe the executive branch can do a fair amount of permitting reforms through their executive orders that Congress can ultimately codify. So, Jonathan, would you talk to me a little bit about this? Is there a scenario where you would welcome an executive order to implement the policies reflected before us today across all of federal management agencies, even as Congress works to pass these laws?
Yes, we believe this is a whole of government issue to solve, and an executive order could help direct federal land agencies to adopt clear timelines with certainty. But at the same time, we think that it is this body, Congress, that we would prefer to actually establish a durable, bipartisan, long-term solution that will allow us to transcend administrations and make sure that the project of connecting our country to the absolute gold standard, which is fiber broadband, can happen. And we no longer have to provide second-class service like the honk and screech of AOL anymore.
Yeah, honk and screech, that's good. Thank you, appreciate that. Mr. Halley, how would the bills before us today, including the Cable Expansion Act, help wireless providers more efficiently deploy towers, small cells, and rooftop facilities that are essential for AI-driven applications?
Thank you very much for the question. Your bill and many of the other bills that are being considered really are directly consistent with our three principles. And I say it all the time, and I'm going to say it again. We think that the process needs to be predictable. And by that, I mean local regulations that are consistent with federal law, contain objective application review criteria with clear workable design standards. And they need to be proportionate. Fees and levels of required review should be commensurate with the nature of the undertaking. Upgrades and modifications of existing structures shouldn't require the same review as a brand new build. And finally, they need to be transparent, right? We need a process where everybody understands where we are in the process and how we can work together to get the project approved.
Excellent, thank you. Hopefully, we can get there in a
I
bipartisan
think we
way.
can.
I'm
And I love
optimistic.
talking about permitting, so this is super fun for me, so thank you.
Excellent, I do too. Staci, last question. You've described railroad crossings as a major bottleneck. How would the Cable Expansion Act, along with the Rail Act, address these challenges and accelerate broadband projects?
I think those two bills together, working hand in hand, very much like what we are advocating for across the government, can ensure that all providers can cross railroads in an efficient way, in an effective way, guarding for safety, ensuring that liability insurance is in place, and thinking about your legislation and the types of providers who would benefit under yours. We can have a full all-of-the-above approach to delivering broadband. It's not dependent on a single technology. And we look forward to making sure that that happens, and we'd love to continue to talk to you about that.
Excellent, very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
We're concluded here. I don't see any more members. I ask so to wrap things up, I ask unanimous consent to insert in the record the documents included on the staff hearing documents list. Without objection, so ordered. Seeing there are no further members wishing to be recognized, I would like to thank our witnesses again for being here today. Sorry for the interruption, but we have to vote around here. So, but y'all are very kind to take your time to be with us. And I remind members that they have 10 business days to submit questions for the record, and I ask the witnesses to respond to questions promptly. Members should submit their questions by the close of business on Thursday, October 2nd. Without objection, the subcommittee is adjourned.